Hey, my name is Sarah, and this story is, well, let's just say it's not one I thought I'd ever tell, but it's too wild to keep to myself. And maybe there's a lesson in it, so here goes. Joshua and I met in college, and we'd been together for almost a decade. We were the couple everyone thought was perfect, always laughing, always telling stories. But somewhere in the middle of raising our two kids and managing our busy lives, things started to feel stale. Maybe some of you know this feeling, the slow drift into routine, the way little moments of connection seem to fade over time. One night we were having dinner, just the two of us, when Joshua brought up a rather surprising idea. He began by saying that he felt we weren't connecting as we used to, and suggested we try something out of the ordinary. At first I was a bit thrown. He was talking about inviting new people into our social lives, not in an intimate way, but just as friends to spice up our meetings and conversations. I was cautious but agreed, thinking it might be a harmless way to add some variety to our social lives. The following week we went to a party a friend of his was throwing. Joshua had invited a few new faces, including these three guys he'd met recently. They were friendly, respectful, and honestly a lot of fun to be around. There was Thomas, who was a huge basketball fan, Aaron, the tech-savvy guy who always had an interesting story to tell, and Isaiah, who had the warmest, most easygoing personality of the bunch. Over the next few weeks, we began to meet regularly as a group. Joshua seemed genuinely happy with the new dynamic. But something surprising began to happen. I found myself enjoying the company of our new friends and noticed that they were paying quite a bit of attention to me. Nothing inappropriate, just a little extra kindness, a few compliments, and a lot of laughter. For the first time in ages, I felt a small thrill of being noticed and admired. One night, Joshua and I were walking home after one of these meetings, and he surprised me with a question that knocked me over. He asked if I had any special connections with our new friends, saying he'd noticed how well we all got along. I played it off and tried to laugh it off, but he pressed on, suggesting that maybe a little harmless flirtation wouldn't be the worst thing for our marriage. This conversation led us into a new, unfamiliar territory, talking openly about our feelings, even the ones we usually keep to ourselves. It was strange, maybe even a little uncomfortable, but it was also exciting. I felt we were breaking through something, reaching a new level of honesty. Joshua admitted that he felt a mixture of excitement and curiosity watching me interact with others, and I shared that yes, it was nice to feel noticed again. We soon developed a sort of agreement. We decided to give each other a bit of freedom in these friendships, knowing that it was all for the thrill of bringing something new into our marriage. There was no plan for anything more, no overstepping of boundaries. We both agreed on that. It was just about keeping the spark alive. A week later, Joshua suggested we have a little get-together at our house. We invited Thomas, Aaron, and Isaiah, and it turned out to be a really nice evening. The boys brought food, we shared drinks, and for the first time I felt totally relaxed in their company. Joshua was in his element, playing host and encouraging everyone to have a good time. It was like we were in some kind of social experiment, except it felt surprisingly real. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself in a small circle with Thomas, Aaron, and Isaiah. We talked about everything, our backgrounds, funny childhood stories, and even a bit about relationships. They made me laugh harder than I had in years, and for a moment, I almost forgot the situation I was in. It was just fun. Joshua was nearby, smiling and encouraging me to enjoy the conversation. Then, out of nowhere, Aaron made a playful remark about how he couldn't believe a woman like me was even real. It was flattering, but I immediately laughed it off, not thinking much of it. But when I looked over at Joshua, I saw him nod, almost as if he agreed with the sentiment. That tiny moment of eye contact said it all. He was totally on board. After everyone had left, Joshua and I sat down, and he admitted that seeing me connect with other people like that made him feel closer to me. It sounds strange, I know, but in that unusual way, it brought us back to the connection we'd once had. It was as if we were sharing a private secret in a very public space. something only we fully understood. I felt closer to Joshua that night than I had in a long time. But things took a turn after that night. We started inviting the boys over more often, and I soon realized that Joshua was pushing the boundaries of this exciting experiment. He'd encouraged me to talk to them more, to spend more time in their company. It was confusing. I couldn't understand if he was really enjoying it or if he was just trying to bring some excitement into our lives. One evening, after Thomas, Aaron, and Isaiah had left, Joshua suggested we play a game, something silly and light-hearted. But somehow, as the game went on, it began to feel more like a test of boundaries. Nothing serious happened, but the energy in the room shifted. I noticed the boys exchanging glances, and I began to feel uneasy, as if the game was going somewhere I hadn't agreed to. Joshua must have sensed my discomfort because he quickly suggested we change the subject. The rest of the evening was spent watching a film, and thankfully the mood eased. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this experiment was taking on a life of its own, going beyond what I was comfortable with. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Joshua's curiosity had set something in motion over which neither of us seemed to have complete control. Part of me liked the attention and excitement. It was something I hadn't felt in years. But another part of me feared that we were entering dangerous territory. Joshua noticed my hesitation and reassured me that we could always stop. But every time we talked about it, he'd end up encouraging me to have fun and let go. He even admitted that he liked seeing me happy in a way that he hadn't seen in a long time. This constant push and pull between curiosity and caution left me in an emotional whirlwind. Then came the night that changed everything. Joshua and I decided to have a barbecue in the garden and invited Thomas, Aaron, and Isaiah. We barbecued, laughed, and shared stories as usual. As the evening wore on, the boys began to talk about their lives, their families, and the things that mattered most to them. It was a heart-to-heart, the kind that makes you feel like you've known someone for years. At one point, Joshua pulled me aside and whispered, "Look how comfortable you are around them. You're glowing." I smiled, a little nervous but also unsure of what he was implying. He leaned forward and said, "Why don't you spend a moment with them? Just chat, get to know them better." I was nervous but agreed, thinking it was just another friendly moment. So I found myself in the corner of the yard with Thomas, Aaron, and Isaiah. We talked about everything under the stars, from personal dreams to places we wanted to travel to. Each of them had such a unique perspective on life, and it was refreshing to hear. Out of the blue, Thomas started talking about relationships, mentioning how important honesty was to him. Aaron agreed, sharing that loyalty was one of his top values. And Isaiah, always the quiet, wise one, added that trust was the foundation of any strong relationship. Their words resonated with me in a way I hadn't expected. It was as if they were describing exactly what I felt was missing in my marriage, but hadn't fully acknowledged until then. As the evening drew to a close, the boys began to gather their things to leave. I found myself standing by the gate with them, feeling strangely sentimental. Thomas looked at me and said, "Thank you for tonight, Sarah. You and Joshua, you two have something very special." Aaron nodded and added, "It's not often you see couples who trust each other so much." Isaiah gave me a warm smile and said, "Take care, Sarah." Their words stayed with me long after they left. I went back inside to find Joshua waiting, looking at me with a strange intensity. I didn't know what he was thinking, but something had clearly changed between us. He asked me if I'd enjoyed the evening, and I told him the truth. I had. There was something liberating about the experience, even though nothing inappropriate had happened. But Joshua wasn't satisfied. He pressed on, asking if I'd felt anything special with any of them. His question took me by surprise. I hesitated, as if he wanted me to admit something that wasn't there. I told him that while I enjoyed their company, I had no desire to cross any boundaries. But his insistence made me uneasy. Over the next few days, Joshua's curiosity turned into something more intense. He asked me detailed questions about my interactions with the boys, replaying moments I'd almost forgotten. At first, I thought he was just fascinated by the thrill of our little social experiment, but it soon became clear that he was looking for something more, as if he wanted me to feel things I wasn't. Finally, one evening, I confronted him. I asked him why he was pushing so hard, why he kept nudging me to explore connections that were clearly only platonic. His answer surprised me. He admitted that he felt inadequate, that he wasn't enough to make me happy anymore. He confessed that he thought bringing other people into our lives might spice things up and rekindle something in me that he feared he couldn't provide. It was a heartbreaking moment to see the uncertainty in his eyes. For years I had thought Joshua was the confident one, the rock of our marriage. But here he was, vulnerable and looking for answers in all the wrong places. I told him not to worry, that the happiness I'd felt was because of us, not because of anyone else. In that conversation, we found ourselves reconnecting in a way we hadn't for years. We acknowledged the cracks in our relationship and faced the unspoken fears we both had. We realized that it wasn't the presence of others that would fix our marriage, but the courage to face our own insecurities and make space for each other again. And so we made a pact. We agreed to stop the experiment and concentrate on rebuilding what we'd lost. We spent more time together, getting to know each other's quirks and desires, and rediscovering the love that had brought us together in the first place. We didn't need anyone else to make us feel alive. We just needed to remember why we fell in love in the first place. It wasn't an easy journey and it took time, but we came out stronger, with a deeper understanding of each other's needs and insecurities. The experience taught us both that sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that bring you closest.